Nobody at Outpost Meridian Reach could say exactly when the old fence went up at the edge of Bay 9. It had rusted long before Sam Bishop arrived, wrapped in warning signs so faded that nobody bothered to read them anymore. People just walked past it, eyes down, the way you walk past something you have learned not to see. Sam had been on the station for 6 days when he first noticed it. He worked in cargo, moving crates from ship to storage under humming lights that buzzed all through the double shift. His hands were rough from the work, and his mind stayed mostly on numbers, weight, volume, delivery times. He was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him anyway. It was during a supply run that he first saw the fence properly. He had taken a wrong turn hauling a crate of spare parts, ending up in a service corridor that dead-ended at a tall metal barrier. Beyond it was a wide dirt pen, empty except for a shape curled in the far corner, half hidden by shadow. He almost walked away. Almost. Then the shape moved. It was enormous, easily 3 times his size, covered in thick gray hide scarred in long, uneven lines. Its ribs showed clearly through its skin, each one visible like the frame of some old broken machine. When it lifted its head, Sam saw eyes that were pale gold, dulled with hunger, but sharp enough to notice him standing there. He should have left. Every instinct told him to leave. But instead he stood frozen, staring at the animal, and the animal stared back. "You're not supposed to be here," said a voice behind him. Sam turned to find a woman in outpost uniform, arms crossed, watching him with the particular tiredness of someone who had explained the same thing too many times before. "Sorry," Sam said. "Took a wrong turn." "What is that?" "That's the beast," she said, like the words were an old habit. "Nobody feeds it, nobody touches it, nobody even talks about it if they can help it. It's been there longer than most of the crew." "Why?" She shrugged. "Old law. Andrei custom. You don't ask, you just follow it if you want to keep your job here." Sam looked past her, back at the creature. It had not moved from its spot, but its eyes were still on him, steady and unreadable. He thought about the ribs he had seen, sharp under gray skin, and something in his chest tightened in a way he did not examine too closely. "Doesn't it need food?" he asked. The woman's face changed slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing it. "That's not really the point," she said. "Come on. You've got a delivery to finish." Sam followed her out, but he found himself glancing back once before the corridor turned. The creature had not moved, but somehow it felt like it was still watching him. That night, Sam lay in his bunk, turning the moment over in his mind. He was not a man who thought much about fairness or unfairness in a big, complicated way. He thought about small things, a job done right, a debt repaid, a hungry animal in a locked cage. He had grown up on a farm before joining outpost work, and there had been rules on the farm too, rules about which animals you fed and which you didn't. But none of those rules had ever included letting something starve behind a fence just because it made people uncomfortable to look at. The next day, during his lunch break, Sam took half his ration bar and put it in his jacket pocket instead of eating it. He told himself he was just going to look again. That was all. Just look. But when he reached the corridor, the fence still there, rusted and silent, he found his hand moving almost on its own. He pushed the ration bar through a gap in the metal and set it down carefully on the dirt just inside. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature stayed where it was, eyes fixed on him, unmoving. Then, slowly it rose. Sam had not realized how tall it truly was until it stood, shoulders far above the top of the fence, its whole body a shifting mass of scarred muscle and old hunger. He should have felt afraid. Instead, he felt something closer to sadness. The creature crossed the pen in a few slow steps and lowered its head toward the food. It did not lunge or snap the way Sam had half expected. It simply picked up the ration bar with surprising gentleness and ate. Sam stood there a while longer, watching, saying nothing. There did not seem to be anything worth saying. When he finally turned to leave, he glanced back one last time, and for just a moment, he was almost certain the creature's pale gold eyes followed him the whole way out. He did not tell anyone what he had done. He did not think of it as an act of defiance or a stand against some old, unfair law. In his mind, it was simple. Something had been hungry, and he had food to spare. That was all. But small things, once started, have a way of growing into something much larger than anyone expects. And though Sam Bishop did not know it yet, The quiet moment at the fence that day was only the beginning. 3 weeks can feel like nothing on a station where every day looks almost the same as the one before it. But for Sam Bishop, those 3 weeks had quietly turned into something like a habit, and the habit had a shape now. Walk to Bay 9, take the long way past the storage lockers, slip through the gap in the fence, and wait. He never made a plan out of it. He simply began saving part of his rations, sometimes a strip of dried meat, sometimes half a bread roll, and carrying it with him during his break. He told himself each time that it would be the last, that he had already done enough, that there was no reason to keep going back. And each time, he went back anyway. The creature no longer waited in the far corner of the pen. By the second week, it had started coming to the fence before Sam even arrived, standing there with its huge head lowered, watching the corridor entrance with those pale gold eyes. The first time it happened, Sam had stopped walking entirely, startled by the sight of something that large simply waiting for him. "Hey," he said quietly, because it seemed strange not to say anything at all. The creature did not answer, of course, but its ears, long and slightly torn at the tips, turned toward the sound of his voice. Sam began to notice small things about it that he had missed before. The way it ate carefully, almost politely, instead of tearing at the food. The way it washed his hands rather than his face, as if hands were what mattered most in a place where very few hands had ever offered it anything kind. The scars along its side, some old and some newer, that told a story Sam could only guess at. He started calling it Rook, without really deciding to. It came from an old bird he remembered from his farm days, a big black bird that used to sit on the fence posts and watch the fields with sharp, patient eyes. It felt right, somehow, even if Rook was nothing like a bird at all. "You've got a name now," Sam told it one afternoon, crouched by the fence with a piece of ration bar in his palm. "Rook. Don't tell anyone I said that. They'd think I'd lost my mind." Rook made a low sound in its chest, not quite a growl, and took the food gently from his hand. It was around this time that people started to notice. A cargo worker named Devin mentioned, half joking, that Sam had been taking a strange route to the mess hall lately. Another asked why his ration count kept coming up short at the end of each week. Sam brushed off the questions as best he could, but he was not a practiced liar, and it showed. It was Administrator Voss who finally called him in. Voss's office was small and cluttered, stacked with data pads and half-finished reports. She did not look up right away when Sam entered, and when she did, her expression was somewhere between tired and cautious. "I've heard some things," she said. "About what?" "About Bay 9. She set down the data pad in her hand. "About you spending time near the fence." Sam considered lying, then decided against it. "I've been feeding it," he said simply. Voss's jaw tightened. "You know that's against outpost law." "I know it's against some old rule nobody's ever explained to me," Sam said. "I don't know if that's the same thing." "It's the same thing here," Voss said. "Whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. That creature isn't a pet, Sam. It's dangerous. It's cursed, according to the people whose land we're standing on. You don't want to be the reason this outpost loses its trade agreement." Sam wanted to argue, but something in Voss's tone told him this was not a fight he could win in her office. He nodded slowly, said he understood, and left. He did not stop. If anything, the warning made him more careful, not more obedient. He changed his route, varied his timing, made sure no one saw him slip through the gap in the fence. He told himself it was because Rook needed him now, that stopping suddenly would be its own kind of cruelty. But some part of him also suspected it had become about more than that. It had become about a wrong he could not fully explain, but could not ignore either. It was Elder Callus who found him next, not by accident, but on purpose. Sam was crouched by the fence, watching Rook eat, when he heard slow, deliberate footsteps behind him. He turned to see an old Andrai figure standing at the mouth of the corridor, robes the color of dried clay, eyes fixed not on Sam but on the creature beyond the fence. "You do not understand what you are doing," Callus said, voice low and heavy. Sam stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "Then maybe you should explain it to me," he said. "Because from where I'm standing, all I see is something starving that didn't have to." Callus said nothing for a long moment, studying him with an expression Sam could not quite read. Then, finally, the elder spoke again. "Perhaps," Callus said quietly, "it is time someone did." Elder Callus did not tell stories quickly. On Andrai, History was treated with a kind of patience that outpost workers rarely had time for. And by the time Callus finished speaking, the light in the corridor had shifted from the sharp amber of midday to the duller gray of the station's evening cycle. The story Callus told was old, older than the outpost itself. Generations ago, before the trade agreements, before Meridian Reach existed at all, a great disaster had struck an on-dry settlement near the mountains. Homes had collapsed. Fields had burned. Many lives had been lost in a single terrible night. In the chaos afterward, survivors spoke of a huge shape moving through the wreckage, gray-hided and enormous, seen fleeing into the hills as the fires spread behind it. From that night on, creatures like Rook were named cursed. Not hunted, not killed outright, but caged whenever found, left to live out their days behind fences like the one at Bay 9, fed only enough to keep from dying outright, as a punishment that could last generations instead of moments. "That is the law you have broken," Callus said quietly. "Not because I believe you meant harm, but because that law has kept peace between our peoples for longer than your species has walked among the stars." Sam listened to all of it without interrupting, and when Callus finished, he found himself more troubled than convinced. "You saw it happen?" he asked. "The disaster, I mean." "I was not yet born," Callus admitted. "The story was told to me, as it was told to those before me." "So nobody living actually saw what happened," Sam said carefully. "They just believed what they were told." Callus's expression tightened, somewhere between offense and old, tired doubt. "Belief does not make something false," the elder said. But there was a hesitation in the words that Sam did not miss. That hesitation stayed with him long after Callus left. Sam was not a scholar. He had never much cared for old records or dusty archives. But cargo work gave him access to storage areas most crew never bothered with, including an old data terminal in the corner of Bay 7 that held decades of outpost logs, most of them ignored, half forgotten, and rarely searched. Over the following days, during breaks he should have spent resting, Sam began digging through those records. He found reports on the original disaster, thin and inconsistent, written decades after the fact by settlers who had not been present themselves. He found no mention anywhere of the creature's involvement beyond a single unverified sighting, repeated so many times across the years that it had hardened into fact simply through repetition. What he did find, buried deeper in the logs, was something else entirely. Records showing that the same disaster had coincided with a mining dispute between two rival on-dry settlements, a dispute that ended, conveniently, with one side blaming a wandering creature for the destruction instead of admitting any fault of their own. Sam was no investigator, and he knew the records could be read a dozen different ways. But the more he read, the harder it became to believe the story Callus had told him was the whole truth. Meanwhile, his visits to Rook continued and grew bolder. He no longer bothered varying his route as carefully. He stayed longer at the fence, sometimes sitting quietly nearby even after the food was gone, simply because Rook seemed calmer when he did. He noticed the way Rook's ears lowered when Sam's voice grew soft, the way its huge frame relaxed instead of tensing whenever he approached. Nothing about the creature's behavior matched the image of a mindless, dangerous monster that had haunted generations of stories. It was only a matter of time before someone reported him again, and this time, Administrator Voss did not call him into her office. She found him herself, waiting near the entrance to Bay 9 as Sam finished another visit. "I warned you," Voss said, arms crossed, her voice sharper than before. "You did," Sam admitted. "And you kept going anyway." "I did that too." Voss exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across her tired eyes. "Sam, I don't care what you believe about old stories or old laws. I care about this outpost staying open. If the Andrai Council decides you're a threat to the agreement, they can shut this whole station down, and every single person here loses their job, their home, everything. You understand that?" "I understand," Sam said quietly. "But I also can't unsee what I've seen." Voss studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. "This is your last warning," she said finally. "Stop, or I'll have you removed from this station myself." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Sam alone in the dim corridor. He looked back toward the fence, toward Rook watching him silently from the shadows, and felt the weight of a choice settling over him that he was no longer sure he could walk away from. Word traveled fast on a station where privacy was hard to find, and by the time Sam heard about Director Wren's visit, half the crew already seemed to know more than he did. The story passed from bay to bay in whispers and half-finished sentences. Wren was coming from outside, someone higher up the chain than Voss had ever been, arriving within the week to review the outpost's operations. And tucked into that review, according to more than one rumor, was a proposal that had nothing to do with cargo schedules or trade routes. Sam heard it plainly for the first time from Devon, who leaned against a crate during a shift break with the particular satisfaction of someone glad to finally have real news to share. "They're talking about getting rid of it," Devon said. "The beast. Wren's bringing some kind of authorization. Word is, it's more trouble than it's worth, especially with all the noise you've been making around Bay 9. Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. Getting rid of it how? Devon only shrugged, and that silence told Sam everything he needed to know. He spent the rest of that shift distracted, his mind circling the same worry over and over. He thought about going to Voss, about pleading his case one more time, but he already knew how that conversation would end. Voss had given him her final warning, and nothing he could say now would undo the trouble he had already caused. The days leading up to Wren's arrival passed slower than any Sam could remember. He kept his visits to Rook brief and quiet, aware that any misstep now could be the one that sealed the creature's fate. Rook, for its part, seemed to sense the shift in mood. It watched him more closely than usual, ears low, body still, as though it understood something serious was coming even without words to explain it. Wren arrived exactly on schedule, 3 days later, accompanied by 2 aides and an air of quiet, practiced authority that made even Voss seem smaller by comparison. Sam only saw the director once, crossing through the main concourse toward the administration offices, but that single glance was enough to unsettle him deeply. Wren did not look like someone who made decisions carelessly. Wren looked like someone who had already made this one. That same evening, the station's alarms went off for an entirely different reason. Sam was midway through a supply run when the warning lights flared red along the corridor walls, and Voss's voice crackled urgently over the station comm. "All personnel, this is not a drill. Unidentified vessels approaching from the southern approach vector. Defense stations, report immediately." The outpost's aging defense grid had never been built for a serious attack, and everyone on the station knew it. Meridian Reach relied on its trade agreements and its distance from major conflict zones far more than it relied on weapons. With Wren's inspection drawing extra attention and extra ships to the area, it did not take much imagination to guess that whoever was approaching had chosen this exact moment on purpose. Sam abandoned his cargo run and ran toward Bay 9 before he had fully decided to do it. The corridor was emptier than usual, most of the crew already rushing toward defense stations or shelter points. Sam reached the fence breathless, finding Rook already on its feet, tense and alert, clearly sensing the chaos building through the station's walls. He stood there for only a moment, his hand hovering near the manual release mechanism bolted beside the gate, a mechanism he had noticed weeks ago but never once considered using. "I don't know if this is the right thing," Sam said quietly, more to himself than to Rook, "but I don't see another one." He pulled the release. The gate groaned open slowly, metal scraping against metal after years of disuse. Rook did not immediately move, watching Sam with something that looked almost like disbelief. Then, finally, it stepped forward, out of the pen for the first time in longer than anyone still living could remember. "Sam." Voss's voice rang out sharply behind him, and Sam turned to see her standing at the mouth of the corridor, eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Beside her stood Elder Callus, silent, staring at Rook with an expression far more complicated than anger. "What have you done?" Voss demanded. Before Sam could answer, the station shuddered violently around them, the deep impact of something striking the outer hull echoing through the walls. Emergency lights flickered, and a distant alarm shifted into a new, more urgent pattern. "They've breached the outer docking ring," Voss said, more to herself than anyone else, her earlier fury momentarily forgotten beneath a wave of panic. Sam looked at Rook, standing tall and free for the first time in years, and then back at Voss and Callus, both frozen between fear and uncertainty. "Whatever you think of me," Sam said, "right now, I think we need every advantage we can get." Somewhere deeper in the station, the sound of the attack grew louder, and none of them had time left to argue. The next few minutes blurred together in a way Sam would never fully manage to piece back into clear order afterward. Alarms shrieked through every corridor. Emergency lighting bathed the station in flickering red, throwing long shadows across walls that trembled with each new impact against the outer hull. Somewhere above them, the raiders had begun cutting through the docking ring, and the sound of tearing metal carried even down into the lower levels where Sam stood. Voss was already moving, barking orders into her comm, directing scattered crew toward defense stations that had not seen real use in years. Callus remained frozen for a moment longer, eyes fixed on Rook, before finally turning and following after Voss without another word. Sam had no weapon, no training for combat, nothing but the crate hook still clipped to his belt from his abandoned cargo run. He looked at Rook, uncertain what exactly he expected the creature to do, uncertain even now whether freeing it had been wisdom or foolishness. Rook answered the question before Sam had to ask it aloud. The creature moved past him with startling speed for something so large, heading not away from the chaos, but directly toward it, toward the sound of the breach further down the corridor. Sam hesitated only a heartbeat before running after it. They reached the docking ring just as the first raiders forced their way through the breached airlock, armored figures moving with brutal efficiency through a station never built to withstand this kind of assault. Station defenders, thin in number and poorly equipped, struggled to hold the line, falling back step by step under heavy fire. Then Rook entered the fight. What followed was nothing like the mindless violence the old stories had described. Rook moved with clear purpose, using its immense size and strength not to destroy blindly, but to disable, to block, to protect. It threw itself between defenders and incoming fire, using its thick hide to absorb blows that would have killed a person outright. It struck down armored raiders with precise, controlled force, never lingering longer than necessary before moving to the next threat. Sam stayed close behind, pulling wounded defenders back from the fighting whenever he could, shouting directions, doing what little he was able to do in the middle of chaos far beyond his skill. More than once, he caught sight of Rook glancing back toward him between attacks, as if making certain he remained safe even in the middle of the fight. Word of what was happening spread through the station almost as fast as the battle itself. Crew members from a dozen different species, many of whom had never once looked directly at the creature behind the fence, now watched in stunned silence as it fought not against them, but for them. Elder Callus arrived partway through the battle, drawn by reports flooding in from every direction, and stood frozen at the edge of the docking ring, watching Rook drive back a group of raiders that had nearly broken through the last line of defense. "This is not possible," Callus murmured, almost to no one. Director Wren arrived only minutes later, flanked by station security, expecting to find chaos and confusion. Instead, Wren found something far harder to explain. A creature condemned generations ago as a curse, fighting with clear intelligence and restraint to protect the very people who had caged it. The battle did not end quickly, but it ended decisively. With Rook anchoring the station's defense, the remaining raiders were pushed back toward their damaged vessel, forced into a hurried retreat rather than risk further losses against an opponent they had never expected to face. In the sudden quiet that followed, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and the low groan of the station settling, Sam finally allowed himself to breathe. Rook stood at the center of the docking ring, breathing hard, scars fresh alongside the old ones, but very much alive. Around it, station crew stared in a silence that held more disbelief than fear. It was Wren who finally broke that silence, stepping forward with the same careful authority Sam had noticed on their first and only encounter, though now that authority seemed shaken. "Someone will explain to me," Wren said slowly, "how a creature locked away as a mindless danger just saved this entire station." No one answered immediately. Then Callus, still staring at Rook with an expression caught somewhere between shame and wonder, finally spoke. "Perhaps," the elder said quietly. "It was never what we were told it was." Wren's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, the director said nothing at all. Then, reluctantly, Wren gestured to one of the aides standing nearby. "Pull every record related to the original disaster. Ren said. All of it. I want to know exactly what we've been protecting and exactly what we've been punishing instead. Sam stood quietly beside Rook as the station slowly began to settle back into order around them. Medical teams moving in to help the wounded, security assessing the damage to the docking ring. He reached out and rested a hand against Rook's side, feeling the deep, steady breathing beneath the scarred hide. You didn't have to do that, Sam said quietly. Rook simply lowered its head slightly, pale gold eyes meeting his, and said nothing at all, because nothing needed to be said. It took 3 full days for the station council to piece together everything that had happened, and 3 more after that before anyone felt ready to speak about it openly. Repairs to the docking ring continued around the clock, and the story of the battle spread through every level of Meridian Reach, growing a little with each retelling, until almost everyone on the station had heard some version of what Rook had done. Sam spent most of those days working double shifts to help with repairs, exhausted but unable to stop thinking about what would happen next. He visited Rook whenever he could, though there was no longer any need to sneak through service corridors or slip food through a fence. Rook stayed near the docking ring most days, resting, healing from the fight, watched now not with fear, but with a kind of cautious curiosity by crew who had spent years avoiding the very sight of it. The council meeting, when it finally happened, was larger than any Sam had attended before. Representatives from every species stationed at Meridian Reach gathered in the main assembly hall, alongside Director Wren, Administrator Voss, and Elder Callus. Sam was asked to attend as well, though he stood near the back, uncomfortable with the attention now turned his way. Wren opened the meeting without much ceremony, laying out what the recovered records had shown. The original disaster, generations ago, had never been clearly linked to any creature at all. The sighting used to justify the curse had come from a single unreliable account, repeated and reshaped over the years until it hardened into unquestioned fact. The true cause of the disaster, buried deep in old mining reports, pointed instead to a structural failure tied to a settlement dispute, one that had been quietly covered up by leaders eager to avoid blame. The curse was never real, Wren said plainly, addressing the room. It was convenient. And convenient stories, repeated long enough, become harder to question than the truth ever was. A heavy silence followed those words. Sam watched Elder Callus rise slowly from among the gathered representatives, robes shifting with the motion, and felt the whole room's attention shift toward the old, Andrai figure. I have spent my life keeping a law I believe protected my people, Callus said, voice steady despite the weight behind the words. I did not question it, because questioning it felt like questioning everything I had been taught to honor. But truth does not ask permission before it changes what we understand. I was wrong, and an entire people paid the price for that mistake far longer than any of us can undo. Callus turned toward where Rook stood near the edge of the hall, brought in at Sam's quiet request despite some initial hesitation from station security. I cannot give back the years that were taken, Callus said, addressing the creature directly now. But I can end the law that took them. With that, Callus formally revoked the old decree, right there in front of the gathered council, ending a punishment that had lasted far longer than anyone alive could properly account for. The fence at Bay 9, already damaged from the battle, was scheduled for full removal within the week, along with the outdated warning signs that had kept generations of crew from ever looking too closely at what lived behind it. Sam was called forward before the meeting closed, though he had not expected it and felt distinctly out of place standing before so many representatives at once. This outpost owes you something it cannot easily repay, Wren said, addressing him directly. Your actions broke station law more than once, and by every rule we had in place, that should have ended badly for you. Instead, it saved this entire station and corrected a wrong far older than any of us realized still needed correcting. Sam shifted uncomfortably under the attention, unsure how to respond to something so much larger than what he had actually intended. I didn't do it to fix anything, he admitted. I just saw something hungry, and I had food to spare. Everything after that just happened. A quiet ripple of something like laughter, warm rather than mocking, passed through parts of the room at that, and even Wren's carefully controlled expression softened slightly. In the weeks that followed, Meridian Reach slowly began to change. The fence at Bay 9 came down, piece by piece, until the wide dirt pin behind it was nothing more than open space, later cleared and turned into something closer to a proper garden. Rook remained near the station, no longer caged, no longer avoided, but recognized now as something the outpost owed a great deal to, rather than something it was ashamed to acknowledge. Sam still worked cargo most days, hauling crates under the same humming lights as always. But some evenings, after his shift ended, he would walk out to the open space where the fence used to stand and find Rook waiting there, exactly the way it once had, though everything about the moment felt entirely different now. Still following old habits, Sam said one evening, settling down beside the massive creature as the station lights dimmed into evening cycle. Rook made a low, familiar sound in its chest and leaned its great scarred head gently against his shoulder. Neither of them needed anything more than that.